When you look at the world and the events that take place on a global stage, it's easy to be swept away by headlines, by the noise, by the shock value of what nations do. But if you really stop and think, if you pause and study the deeper lesson, you realize that everything you're seeing on the outside is a reflection of a principle that applies not just to nations, not just to governments, but to you as an individual. When India opposes tariff, a staggering 38,000 crore move that shook its relationship with one of the most powerful economies in the world, that wasn't just a political act, it was an act of boldness. It was a statement that said, we are willing to disrupt the normal order for the sake of our future. And this is where most people fail, because most people want growth. They want prosperity. They want independence, but they want it without the boldness, without the courage to shake things up. They want comfort and progress at the same time, but life doesn't work like that. Progress demands boldness. Think about it. Every single person who has achieved something extraordinary in their life has at some point made a bold decision that defied logic, defied comfort, and defied the expectations of everyone around them. Nations, companies, leaders. Every one of them had to stand in the face of opposition and say, we're going to do this differently. That's what India did in that moment. It wasn't simply about tariffs. It was about setting a new tone, establishing a new posture in the world economy. And you, in your own life, have moments where you're faced with a decision. Do you play it safe, keep everybody happy, avoid rocking the boat? Or do you take the bold step, the disruptive move, the leap that may feel uncomfortable, but holds the seed of your transformation? You see, the masses don't like boldness because it disturbs their sense of safety. It challenges their routines. It threatens their predictability. But if you want to grow, you can't live by the masses. You've got to think at a higher level. Boldness is where breakthroughs are born. Just look back on your life. Every turning point, every major transformation you've had, wasn't it connected to a bold move? Maybe it was leaving a job. Maybe it was starting a business. Maybe it was walking away from a toxic relationship. Maybe it was investing in yourself when everyone told you it was foolish. That's the same principle you see nations applying when they make moves that shock the world. It's not recklessness, it's strategy wrapped in courage. What India did is what you must do. Act with awareness that boldness will draw attention. Boldness will stir criticism. Boldness will trigger resistance. But boldness also commands respect. You can't get respect without boldness. And you can't rise in any area of life without respect. The world doesn't respect people who sit quietly waiting for permission. It respects the individual who says, this is my vision, and I'm going to pursue it regardless of the noise. And the funny thing is, the very people who resist you at first eventually follow you. They adjust to your decision. They get used to your new standard. Boldness has a way of teaching others how to treat you, how to view you, how to relate to you. If you only do what is safe, you will only get what is average. And average is not why you're here. You weren't created to blend in the background. You weren't created to just exist. You were created to express, to expand, to push beyond. But the door to expansion only opens when you choose boldness. And here's the truth. Boldness is uncomfortable. It doesn't feel secure. But the moment you step into it, something powerful begins to happen. You begin to see possibilities that were hidden before. You begin to attract opportunities that only show up to the bold. You begin to develop a strength and a resilience you didn't even know was in you. Most people think boldness is about taking risks for the sake of risk. No, boldness is about alignment with your higher purpose. When you know where you're going, when you have a vision that compels you, boldness is the natural response. It's not reckless, it's responsible. Because the worst kind of irresponsibility is living beneath your potential, playing small, suppressing your gifts because you're afraid of what people will say. Nations can't afford to play small in a world economy, and neither can you afford to play small in your own life. Boldness is a decision that says, I'm not going to wait for permission anymore. I'm not going to let fear dictate my future. I'm not going to live by what's convenient. I'm going to live by what's necessary for my growth. For every time you hesitate, every time you choose safety over boldness, you reinforce the idea that your life is controlled by fear. But every time you choose boldness, you build a new identity. You become the kind of person who makes moves, who takes steps, who sets new standards. That identity becomes your greatest asset because it shapes everything else. Just as India's move has reshaped its global identity, your bold decisions reshape how the world sees you, how opportunities flow to you, how people respond to you. Boldness is not a one-time act. It's a way of living. It's a posture. It's waking up every day asking, where do I need to step out of the shadows today? Where do I need to make a move that others will hesitate to make? Where do I need to challenge the status quo in my own thinking? Because that's where the growth is. That's where the breakthroughs are. That's where the life you dream of is hiding. And if you want to experience it, you've got to step into it with the same energy, the same resolve, the same willingness to disrupt that nation's display when they shock the world with their decisions. When the world shifts, when something happens on a scale so large that markets tremble and headlines scream, most people freeze. They see danger, they see crisis, they see a reason to worry, and they let fear dictate their response. But in truth, every shift that occurs in life, whether on a global stage or in your personal journey, carries with it the seed of opportunity. India's decision to impose tariffs worth a third than 8,000 crore sent ripples through its relationship with the United States, shaking industries, challenging supply chains, and forcing adjustments. To some, this may look like instability, a setback, or even a brewing conflict. But to those with eyes trained on growth, it looks like a door opening. It looks like fresh possibilities emerging, new avenues being created, and the chance to redefine the game. That's the reality of shift. They don't just create problems, they create opportunities. The question is, which one will you focus on? Most people are conditioned to fear change because it disrupts what they know. They are comfortable with the familiar, even if the familiar isn't serving them. The moment the ground shakes, they panic. But the ones who rise, the ones who build empires, the ones who move ahead in life, are the ones who train themselves to lean into the shift and search for what's possible. Think about entrepreneurs who built fortunes during times of economic downturn, while the masses were selling off, while fear was spreading like wildfire. These individuals were asking, where is the opportunity here? What can I create in this environment that wasn't possible before? That mindset is the difference between stagnation and growth. And it's the same mindset nations adopt when they see disruption as a way to reposition themselves in the global economy. When India made this move, it wasn't just about tariffs. It was about signaling to the world that the balance of power is shifting, that the old way of doing things isn't the only way. That very disruption forces industries to innovate, forces business to look at new markets, forces countries to reconsider alliances. This is the essence of opportunity. When something shifts, it compels you to find a new angle. You can resist it and stay stuck, or you can embrace it and grow. And this is exactly what you must do in your life. Every setback, every unexpected turn, every moment when things don't go according to plan, it's not just a problem, it's an invitation. An invitation to step back, to reframe, and to see where the hidden opening lies. Opportunity rarely comes dressed as ease. It almost always comes wrapped in difficulty. It comes through the door of disruption. The reason most people miss it is because they are too focused on what they are losing to notice what they could gain. They're stuck in a mindset of scarcity, and scarcity blinds them. But when you train your mind to look for the gain, to search for the seed of possibility inside the problem, you become unstoppable. Suddenly, what breaks others becomes the very thing that builds you. What looks like loss becomes the foundation of your next breakthrough. Think about how many innovations were born out of crisis. Companies that revolutionized industries weren't created when everything was stable. They were created when the world was in turmoil, when old systems were collapsing, when people were desperate for new solutions. That's because disruption is fertile ground. It clears away the old and makes space for the new. The same principle applies in your own life. When something falls apart, when a door closes, when a relationship ends, when a job disappears, that's not the end. It's the beginning of something new. If you choose to see it that way, the challenge is training your perception. You have to condition yourself to ask different questions when shifts happen. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You ask, what is this making possible for me? Instead of saying, I lost everything, you say, what can I build now that I couldn't before? That's how you unlock opportunity. That's how you turn disruption into advantage. That's how you align yourself with growth rather than fear. Nations know this principle. They make moves that look harsh, look risky, look disruptive. But behind every decision is a vision of a new opportunity. India's move created discomfort. Yes, but discomfort is the birthplace of growth. And you need to understand that in your own journey, comfort is the enemy of progress. It lulls you into staying the same, into accepting less, into lowering your potential. Discomfort shakes you awake. It forces you to adapt, to learn, to create, to evolve. So every time you face a shift, whether it's in your finances, your career, your health, your relationships, don't rush to call it a crisis. Step back and look again. Ask yourself, what is this shaking loose that needed to go? What new door is this opening? What strength is this pulling out of me? That's the posture of someone who thrives in any environment. Because let me tell you, opportunities don't disappear when times get hard. They multiply. They just shift form. And only those who are willing to look deeper, to think differently, to move boldly will find them. When you study how nations operate, how they plan, how they execute decisions that shape economies and redefine alliances, you'll notice something powerful. Nothing happens by accident. Strategies are mapped out years in advance. Scenarios are calculated. Outcomes are weighed. And moves are made with an awareness of both risk and reward. That kind of foresight, that discipline is not reserved for governments or leaders. It is a principle that you, as an individual, must apply to your own life if you want to rise above the average. Too many people drift through their days reacting instead of anticipating, responding instead of initiating, waiting for life to tell them what's next, instead of deciding for themselves what's next. And then they wonder why they're always behind, why they're always scrambling, why opportunities pass them by. The truth is, the same mindset that drives a nation to impose tariffs in a calculated bid for strength is the same mindset that can drive you to build a life of power, freedom, and abundance. Think about the way most people live paycheck to paycheck, waiting for the economy to improve, waiting for someone else to promote them, waiting for conditions to get easier. That's reactive living, and it's the fastest way to stay stuck. But when you take on the mindset of strategy, and when you begin to think like a leader, like a nation positioning itself in a global economy, you stop waiting. You start to anticipate. You ask, what's likely to happen if I stay on this path? What outcome will this choice create a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Most people don't ask those questions. And that's why they're surprised when life throws them a curveball. But the individual who trains themselves to think ahead, to plan, to anticipate is never caught off guard. They may face challenges, but they're prepared. They may encounter setbacks, but they already have the resilience built into their mindset to handle it. When India made its decision, it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It wasn't emotional. It was strategic. And that's exactly how you need to approach your own growth. Emotional decisions may feel good in the moment, but they rarely build lasting success. Strategy, on the other hand, creates a foundation. Strategy gives you clarity. Strategy aligns your actions with your vision. If you want to build wealth, you don't just hope money comes. You create a plan. You discipline yourself. You anticipate where your efforts will compound. If you want health, you don't just react to sickness. You prepare your body daily. You anticipate what habits will sustain you long term. If you want fulfilling relationships, you don't just respond when problems arise. You cultivate connection. You invest in communication. You anticipate what will strengthen the bond. This is what it means to live with mindset over markets. Because markets, whether financial, political, or social, are always changing. They go up, they go down. They shake and they shift. If your peace, your growth, your identity is tied to those external fluctuations, you'll always be unstable. But when you ground yourself in mindset, you become steady. You learn to anticipate the shifts rather than fear them. You learn to build your life on principles that don't change, no matter what the world does. Principles like discipline, vision, persistence, and foresight. With that kind of mindset, you can navigate any storm. Look at history and you'll see this truth confirmed again and again. The individuals who thrived during turbulent times weren't the ones with the most resources at the start. They were the ones with the strongest mindset. They saw opportunities where others saw collapse. They made moves while others froze. They anticipated outcomes while others were distracted by noise. And because of that, they came out stronger, wealthier, freer. This is not an accident. It's a way of thinking. And it's available to you if you choose to adopt it. Ask yourself, how often do you plan your life the way a strategist plans a campaign? How often do you sit down and ask, what is the vision I'm moving toward? What steps am I taking today that align with that vision? What disruptions might come? And how can I prepare myself to turn them into advantages? Most people never do this. And that's why they feel powerless when circumstances change. But power doesn't come from control. It comes from preparation. It comes from thinking ahead, from refusing to live in reaction mode. This is the secret. Nations don't wait for permission to make moves. They act with foresight, with strategy, with clarity. And that is exactly how you need to approach your life. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop waiting for someone else to hand you an opportunity. Stop reacting to every shift with fear. Instead, anticipate. Position yourself. Train your mind to see further than the average person sees. When you adopt that kind of mindset, markets can rise and fall. Headlines can change daily. Economies can shake. But you'll remain steady, moving with purpose, building with intention, creating with power. Because the foundation of your growth is not a market, it's your mindset. Every single event that unfolds in the world is not random. There is no such thing as something happening out of nowhere. What you are witnessing on a global scale is simply the law of cause and effect expressing itself. India's decision to impose tariffs worth 38,000 crore is not just an isolated move. It is the cause of a series of ripple effects that will reach far beyond economics, far beyond policy. And this law doesn't just govern nations, it governs your life. It governs your relationships, your finances, your health, your success. Everything you're experiencing right now is the effect of causes you've set in motion in the past. That can be a sobering thought, but it's also incredibly empowering because it means if you don't like the effect, you have the ability to change the cause. Most people look at life as if it's happening to them. They don't connect the dots between what they've done, how they've thought, what they believe, and the results they're living with today. They think it's luck or chance or bad breaks or unfair circumstances. But if you really study your own history, you'll see that every effect you've lived through had a cause. Sometimes it was a choice you made. Sometimes it was a belief you held. Sometimes it was an action you didn't take. And the results you're living with are simply the natural outgrowth of that cause. Nations understand this principle. They know that when they act, when they move, when they decide, there will always be an effect. They calculate, they plan, they anticipate those effects, and they decide if the risk is worth the reward. You have to begin to live your life the same way. The law of cause and effect is not biased. It doesn't bend for certain people. It doesn't give favors to certain nations. It doesn't excuse anyone. It operates with precision, with certainty. If you plant a seed, you get a harvest. If you plant apple seeds, you don't get oranges. If you sow discipline, you reap success. If you sow laziness, you reap struggle. It's simple, but it's so often ignored because people want effects without thinking about the cause. They want wealth without sowing effort. They want health without sowing discipline. They want relationships without sowing connection. And when it doesn't work, they call it unfair. But the law is never unfair. It's always exact. Look at India's move again. That tariff wasn't a random act. It was a cause deliberately set in motion, knowing that the effects would reach the U.S. market, knowing that industries would feel pressure, knowing that negotiations would shift, knowing that respect would be recalibrated. They understood the principle. If we want a different effect in our global positioning, we must create a different cause. And you need to grasp that same truth. If you want different results in your life, stop wishing for them and start planning new causes. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every decision you make is a cause. Sets energy in motion. You might not see the effect immediately, but it's inevitable. That's why consistency is so powerful. You may go to the gym today and not see results, but if you continue planning that, because day after day, the effect will show up. You may study, invest, save, or build today and not feel any different, but over time, the effect will manifest. Just like tariffs ripple into economies over years, your actions ripple into your future. That's why it's so critical to become conscious of the causes you are planning daily. Most people live unconsciously. They don't realize that by complaining every day, they're planting seeds of negativity that will eventually show up as missed opportunities. They don't realize that by procrastinating, they're planting seeds of delay that will show up as regret. They don't realize that by surrounding themselves with low standards, they're planting seeds of mediocrity that will show up as limitations. And then years later, they look at the effect and say, how did I get here? The answer is always the same. The cause was planted long ago. But the empowering part is this: the moment you understand the law of cause and effect, you can change the trajectory of your life. You don't have to accept the current effects as permanent. You can start today planning different causes. You can start choosing discipline over distraction, vision over fear, courage over hesitation, and those causes will generate new effects in your future. It won't always happen instantly, but it will happen inevitably. Just like a nation making bold moves doesn't see the full outcome immediately, but they know it's coming. You too must operate with that same faith. Everything in your life right now is evidence of the law at work. If you're thriving in certain areas, it's because you planted the right causes. If you're struggling in others, it's because the causes haven't been aligned. Don't beat yourself up for it. Don't dwell in regret. Simply recognize the truth and take control of the causes you're planting moving forward. You are not a victim of randomness. You are the creator of causes and therefore the shaper of effects. The law is unbreakable. You can't escape it. You can only work with it. Nations that ignore it collapse. Companies that ignore it fail. Individuals that ignore it struggle. But those who embrace it, who live by it, who deliberately plant causes that align with their vision, rise with certainty. Strength is never proven when everything is easy, when resources flow without interruption, when support is abundant. True strength is demonstrated when you choose self-reliance, when you decide that you will no longer lean on others to provide what you have the power to create for yourself. That's exactly what India's tariff move represents. By imposing such a significant cost, it wasn't just about economics. It was about sending a message. Who can stand on our own? We don't need to bow to the systems of others. We can create our own path. That's a principle you must internalize in your own life, because too often individuals are waiting for help, waiting for rescue, waiting for someone else to provide. And while you wait, your potential remains dormant. While you lean, your muscles of self-reliance never grow. Strength comes when you decide no more excuses, no more dependency. I will take ownership of my life, my choices, and my future. Think about the way most people live. They depend on the job to give them security, not realizing that a job can vanish overnight. They depend on others for validation, not realizing that approval can be withdrawn at any moment. They depend on circumstances to line up perfectly before they move, not realizing that conditions rarely ever favor action. Dependency is weakness disguised as safety. It feels safe because you're leaning, but leaning always leaves you vulnerable. The moment the thing you're leaning on shifts, you collapse. That's why self-reliance is real strength. It's not about arrogance or isolation. It's about cultivating the ability to create, to sustain, to build regardless of what's happening around you. Look at how nations rise. They don't rise by waiting for another country to save them. They rise by developing their own resources, by investing in their own industries, by standing firm on their own vision. When India made this decision, it wasn't simply about conflict. It was about identity. It was about proving that strength doesn't come from being agreeable. Strength comes from being self-determined. And in your life, you've got to come to that same realization. Stop waiting for someone else to fix your problems. Stop waiting for family to support your dreams. Stop waiting for the economy to hand you an opportunity. You've got to stand up and say, I am the source. I am the solution. I am the one responsible for how this turns out. Self-reliance is empowering because it shifts the control back into your hands. When you rely on others, you give them power over your future. You place your destiny in someone else's control. But when you rely on yourself, your vision, your discipline, your persistence, you hold the keys. That doesn't mean you never receive help. It means you don't need it in order to move forward. Help becomes a bonus, not a necessity. And that subtle shift changes everything. Because when you don't need, you operate from strength. You negotiate differently. You walk differently. You attract differently. People to feel when you stand strong on your own foundation and they respect it. It's the same in business, in relationships, in personal growth. When you stop leaning on others to give you confidence, you develop your own. When you stop waiting for someone to open a door for you, you build your own door. When you stop expecting others to motivate you, you discipline yourself to move regardless of how you feel. That's self-reliance, and it's the mark of true strength. The irony is that once you become self-reliant, that's when the right support shows up. People are drawn to strength, not dependency. Opportunities find their way to those who prove they don't need to be carried. There's also a deep freedom in self-reliance, because when you stop leaning, you stop fearing the loss of what you're leaning on. Most people live in fear because they've tied their survival to something outside of themselves. They fear losing the job, losing the relationship, losing the approval, losing the system. That fear keeps them trapped, compliant, and limited. But when you stand on your own, you don't fear loss the same way, because your foundation isn't external, it's internal. You know that no matter what shifts, no matter what changes, you have the ability to rebuild, to recreate, to move forward. That's a level of strength that no one can take away from you. Just as nations earn respect by proving they can provide for themselves, you earn self-respect by proving to yourself that you can sustain yourself. Every time you make a choice to handle things on your own, to figure it out, to take responsibility instead of waiting for rescue, you build strength. And that strength compounds. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to walk with an inner authority that says, no matter what happens, I will find a way. That is the essence of true freedom. So look at your own life. Where are you still leaning? Where are you still waiting for someone else to provide what you could create? Where are you still dependent on approval, on support, on systems that may not last? Those are the areas where your strength is being tested, where you're being invited to rise into self-reliance. And the moment you choose to step into that, you step into a different kind of life. One built not on fragility, not on dependency, but on strength, on confidence, on the certainty that you are enough and that you can create enough. The world is not static. It is constantly shifting. Economies rise and fall. Industries transform overnight. Technologies emerge that completely redefine how we live, how we work, how we communicate. What was valuable yesterday can become irrelevant tomorrow. And in the middle of all of this, the one truth that separates those who thrive from those who struggle is the ability to adapt. When India made the shocking decision to impose tariffs worth of 38,000 crore, it was a demonstration of adaptation. It was a recognition that the global game had shifted, that the old rules could no longer guarantee the same results, and that survival, let alone prosperity, requires bold adjustment. That principle is just as true for nations as it is for you as an individual, because life will not wait for you to be comfortable. It will not wait for you to catch up. It moves whether you are ready or not. And if you refuse to adapt, you get left behind. Most people resist change because it disrupts their sense of security. They want things to remain predictable, stable, consistent, because predictability feels safe. But the paradox is that true safety doesn't come from clinging to what's familiar. It comes from becoming the kind of person who can thrive no matter what changes. Adaptability is real security. It means that even when the ground shakes, even when the systems collapse, even when everything you thought was permanent suddenly shifts, you still find a way forward. That's why adapting to change is not optional. It is the key to unlocking prosperity in every area of your life. Think about history. The people who created fortunes weren't the ones who resisted change. They were the ones who embraced it before anyone else did. When industries shifted, when economies crashed, when new technologies disrupted old systems, the ones who prospered were the ones who leaned into the change, learned it, mastered it, and used it as a vehicle for growth. While the masses complained, while the fearful tried to hold away to what was slipping away, these individuals asked, how can I use this? How can I turn this shift into an advantage? That's the mindset you must train yourself to carry into every season of life. Adaptation is not about abandoning your vision. It's about adjusting your strategy so your vision can survive in new conditions. Too many people confuse rigidity with strength, but rigidity is actually weakness. When something is rigid, it breaks under pressure. Flexibility, on the other hand, bends but doesn't break. Adaptability allows you to pivot without losing your direction. That's how you build something lasting, because the truth is, nothing external stays the same. Economies shift, opportunities shift, people shift. And if you insist that things stay the same, you set yourself up for disappointment and failure. But when you accept that change is constant, you free yourself from fear. You begin to see every shift as a signal, as feedback, as guidance pointing you to your next step. The resistance to change usually comes from fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of failing. But the unknown is where growth lies. The unknown is where breakthroughs hide. The unknown is where you discover strengths you didn't know you had. If you stay only where you are comfortable, you lock yourself into the same results you've always had. But when you adapt, when you step into the unknown, when you learn to flow with change instead of fighting it, you open yourself to new levels of prosperity, new opportunities, new experiences. Look at your own life. How many times have you resisted a change only to later realize was the best thing that could have happened? Maybe a door closed, a job ended, a relationship shifted. And at the time it felt like a disaster. But later you saw that it pushed you into a better path, into growth, into strength you wouldn't have developed otherwise. That's the power of adaptation. What feels like disruption is often preparation. What feels like loss is often redirection. But only those who adapt get to experience the reward. Adaptation is also about mindset. You have to train yourself to see opportunity where others see crisis. Most people get stuck because they interpret change as danger. But you must learn to interpret change as possibility. That doesn't mean ignoring challenges. It means reframing them. Instead of saying everything is falling apart, you say everything is shifting to make space for something new. Instead of saying this is the end, you say, this is the beginning of another chapter. Language matters because the way you describe change to yourself determines how you respond to it. And your response determines whether you prosper or struggle. The truth is, adaptability is a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger it becomes. At first, change will always feel uncomfortable. But the more you lean into it, the more you begin to trust yourself. You start to develop confidence that no matter what happens, you can handle it. That confidence becomes the foundation of your prosperity. Because prosperity is not about everything staying the same. It's about you becoming capable of navigating whatever comes. Nations demonstrate their power when they adapt to global shifts. Individuals demonstrate their power when they adapt to personal shifts. In both cases, the result is the same. Those who adapt rise. Those who resist fall behind. So when the next change comes, and it will, don't fight it. Don't fear it. Don't run from it. Step into it. Ask yourself, how can I use this? What new opportunity is hidden here? How can this shift serve my growth? That is the mindset that transforms change from a threat into a stepping stone. That is the posture that allows you to prosper in any environment. That is the truth that guarantees growth when others are shrinking. And that is why adapting to change will always be the key that unlocks the door to prosperity.